Good evening, everyone. I don't know how many of you saw the recent movie about me. I was never that good looking and not that much of a fighter, more of a lover. Stop talking about how far we have come and start talking about how close we are. Remember, the poorest black child born in a democracy is born with the same rights as a white child born of the wealthiest parents. Be relentless. We are born beyond doubt, products of our circumstances, of our time, and our place in history. We are products of a people, of our relationships, and our day-to-day lived experiences. Our lives constantly under construction. Our circumstances have a profound influence on how we see the world, how we see justice, equality, and fairness. You live in a time and within a nation that treats the rich and the guilty far more justly than the poor and the innocent. Circumstances, my friends, circumstances. A quote from one of my heroes. A man who is worked upon by what he works on. He may carve out his circumstances, but his circumstances will carve him out as well. Frederick Douglass. Let your circumstances and your passion for justice carve you out. My name is Thurgood Marshall. I am the proud great-grandson of slaves. My thanks to Becky and Spokane Public Libraries for once again bringing me back from the dead. I'm excited to be here. I did have to cancel coffee with Justice Ginsburg and Justice Scalia. I'm not here tonight to thrill you with my once legal mind. Tonight, I have but 3 short objectives. 1, I want to talk to you a bit about the Thurgood Marshall you do not know and the circumstances that carved me out. 2, I want to inspire and encourage you to always do the right thing, even if it's the hardest thing. And 3, before I go, I want to share with you what I call the danger of historical amnesia. And with that, what worries me about your today. So, who was Thurgood Marshall that once walked this earth? What were the circumstances and relationships that carved me out and my life's work? I was born in Baltimore, Maryland in 1908, the second child of Norma and William Marshall. My mother was an elementary teacher. My father was a waiter and country club steward in Baltimore. Did you know that Baltimore had the largest free black population in the country prior to the Civil War? By the 1930s, you could find the likes of Duke Ellington, Billie Holiday, Louis Armstrong, and Count Basie in Baltimore. We had our own Renaissance. Imagine yourself, a black child growing up in a city with a large, vibrant black population, among black folks living under real and not imagined Jim Crow laws, as a consequence of the Plessy decision of 1896. And right next door to Washington, D.C., the home of the President of the United States, and also the home of Howard University, Black Howard University. I attended Frederick Douglass High School, the second oldest school in Baltimore, specifically to educate black children. Trouble often found me in school. So my teacher used to send me to the basement with a copy of the U.S. Constitution, which I memorized. That suggests to you how much time I spent in the basement. Baltimore had a large black middle class, yet the city was a racist, segregated place. When I left this earth in January of 1993, Baltimore was one of the most segregated cities in the entire United States. And unfortunately, it has become one of the most violent cities in the United States. Growing up, my daddy used to walk past the courthouse in Baltimore, and he would often stop and go in and find a quiet place to sit just to listen to the legal arguments. I don't know why. And he never said why. He just did it. Then he would come home, rehash those arguments with his two sons. I never asked him why, but he did. I eventually graduated from Douglass with a close friend, someone you might have heard of before, Cab Calloway. Cab and I went on to Lincoln University in Pennsylvania together. It was by circumstance to be born, raised, and educated among Black people who I loved, but who accepted their circumstance of Jim Crow. It was not until I found myself in different circumstances throughout my life did I begin to understand how each carved me out. Lincoln University was the first degree granting Black university in the United States, established in 1854, prior to the Civil War. All the students at Lincoln were Black. All the faculty at Lincoln were white. Lincoln carved me out. Lincoln is where I met another good friend that you might also have heard of. Poet, writer, by the name of Langston Hughes. Langston influenced me greatly. Langston was the one who really got me thinking about racism in America. You see, where I grew up in Baltimore, if you were Black and walking on the sidewalk and a white person was coming the other way, and there was not a lot of room on the sidewalk, you were taught to step into the street and let them pass. Langston, oh, Langston, wanted nothing to do with that. He greatly influenced me. He argued that the U.S. Constitution, which I had previously memorized, rendered Black people second-class citizens. He and I argued that point many, many times. Langston and others fought to change the faculty of Lincoln, and their fight was eventually won. 15 years after we graduated, Lincoln installed their first Black president. While at Lincoln, I also met and married the love of my life, Vivian Buster Burley. Buster was a student at neighboring University of Pennsylvania. We married my senior year. After Lincoln, I wanted to attend the University of Maryland Law School. There was a problem. It was legally impossible for a Black student to go to the University of Maryland Law School. Being rejected based on my race was a dream denied. It was the best law school and it was close to my childhood home. But that rejection proved to be a streak of good fortune because my second choice was Howard University. Howard, established in 1867. Howard is where I met my mentor, Dean Charles Hamilton Houston, a dyed-in-the-wool integrationalist and fearless defender of Black folks wrongly or rightly accused in a court of law. Dean Houston was the foremost Black attorney in the nation at that time. He believed that integrated schools were the key to equal rights. His mentorship served me well. My first real legal test came assisting Dean Houston with the murder trial of George Crawford, a Black man accused of the murder of two white women in Virginia. In those days, a Black man accused of murder or rape of a white person was going to die, legally or illegally. Crawford was convicted, but sentenced to life. Dean Houston and our legal team felt we won a great victory. Mr. Crawford avoided the death sentence. Now, the Crawford case marked the first for an all-Black legal team in a major case in a Southern courthouse. Our legal team challenged jury selection while cross-examining prominent white officials. The biased jury selection process was clearly exposed by Dean Houston, laying the groundwork for a major U.S. Supreme Court case a few years later. The court later ruled that biased jury selection was unconstitutional. An entire generation of civil rights attorneys, including myself and my classmate Oliver Hill, who was also on the Crawford case with me, were inspired to pursue civil rights law. It was because of Dean Houston and the NAACP. My circumstances and experiences while at Howard under Dean Houston carved me out. I graduated first in my class, and Oliver Hill, my classmate, graduated second. Right out of law school, I felt I knew something about the criminal justice system. Right out of law school, I struck out on my own, lost more money than I earned, and I defended a 25-year-old Black man by the name of James Gross. James Gross was one of 3 black men charged with murder and facing the death penalty in Prince George's County, Maryland. I argued that my client, Mr. Gross, drove the car, but that the other 2 men actually shot the victims. The jury convicted all 3 of first-degree murder and sentenced them to death. James Gross was hanged in the Maryland penitentiary. It was a defining moment for me. As his attorney, I was a witness to his execution. I learned 3 powerful and unforgettable lessons after that case. 1, it's not enough just being right. I had to be twice as good as any white lawyer. 2, it changed how I approached all white juries. And 3, the death of James Gross changed my opinion of the death penalty forever. I gained a reputation for defending black men facing the death penalty. But I soon returned to my mentor in the NAACP, Dean Houston. The next significant case we had was Donald Gaines Murray, a black man and recent graduate of Amherst College, who sued the University of Maryland Law School over their lack of admission. Dean Houston and I represented Murray, and we won. Mr. Murray became the first black student to be admitted there. A bit of personal redemption. During those years with Dean Houston, I was called a crusader and a savior. I was never comfortable with that. I was called a lot of other things as well. Sweat v. Painter case, 1946. Again, involving a law school, University of Texas. We challenged the Plessy decision of 1896 again. Although Dean Houston unfortunately, tragically died of a heart attack during that case, we still won. And another black person was admitted to law school. You might have heard there was another case, 1954. I knew it first as Briggs v. Elliott, a discrimination case. And there were other cases that the Supreme Court bundled together. They were all discrimination cases. And that bundle became known as Brown versus Board of Education, Topeka, Kansas. I argued that case before the Supreme Court. My opponent, John W. Davis, a segregationist. Chief Justice Earl Warren, appointed by Republican President Dwight D. Eisenhower, replaced Justice Fred Vinson, who died during that case suddenly of a heart attack in his sleep. I can tell you now that if Vinson would have stayed the Chief Justice, we likely would have lost. Earl Warren was a gift, a liberal out of California. We brought before the U.S. Supreme Court Black psychologist Kenneth and Mimi Clark, who testified from their research that real, actual injury and not theoretical injury occurred in the minds of Black children who attended segregated schools, like mine. We won. It was the first real test of the Plessy Doctrine. Earl Warren eventually announced the opinion, there is no such thing as separate but equal. At the same time, I was being heralded as Mr. Civil Rights, a savior, a crusader. Some Black folks began referring to me as Uncle Tom. Why? Because I argued publicly with Malcolm X, the Nation of Islam, SNCC, the Black Panther Party. I argued against Dr. King's nonviolent protest marches, referring to them as dangerous and rhetorical fluff. I argued publicly against my brothers. In 1961, President John Fitzgerald Kennedy appointed me to the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Second Circuit. His brother, then Attorney General Bobby Kennedy, tried to block my nomination. Now listen, arguing that the court was already full of liberals. Can you imagine that? In 1967, President Lyndon Baines Johnson nominated me for the position of Associate Justice of the Supreme Court of the United States. I had argued 32 cases before the U.S. Supreme Court and won 29 of them, more than any other American. I also had represented more men on death row than any previously appointed justice. President Johnson himself said of me, he is most qualified. I was appointed, becoming the court's first African American justice. And while on the bench, I wrote over 150 decisions supporting the rights of immigrants, the need for affirmative action in order to level the playing field, limiting search and seizure, double jeopardy, and right to privacy. I argued for stricter gun control, advocated for legalization of abortion in Roe versus Wade, and to end the death penalty. Throughout my 24-year tenure on the court, Republican presidents appointed 8 consecutive conservative justices. I became the one isolated liberal member of an increasingly conservative court. For the latter part of my tenure on the bench, I was largely relegated to issuing strongly worded dissent, as the court reinstated the death penalty, literally dismantled affirmative action, dismantled Roe versus Wade, and then there was the ongoing immigration nightmare. Do I regret being called loud and defiant? And Uncle Tom? Absolutely not. I stand rightly accused, as you. I stand with my convictions, my wins and my losses, as we all must do. Do I have regrets? Yes. Was what I said back then the right thing to say? Probably not. I regret my contentious relationship with Dr. King, Malcolm, and others. I regret it. My greatest regret, however, is that so many Black people died young and violent deaths under my watch. To add insult to injury, I watched President George W. Bush nominate and appoint Clarence Thomas to the bench in 1990. A man who is proving to be the most conservative of all Supreme Court justices. What a replacement. So, what about historical amnesia? I am calling what I've been watching lately a bad case of historical amnesia. The insurrection in D.C. was no surprise to many of us, given our nation's history of white backlash, xenophobia, and the past 4 years. It has been said many times, when you fail to look the beast of racism and white supremacy in the eye, it will come back to haunt you. Willful amnesia has consequences. Amnesia in general is a condition in which one's memory is lost. It seems of late that you have been experiencing a kind of collective willful forgetfulness. It appears on the face of the evidence that in no time in recent history have you been so much in need of critical hope. Critical hope comes out of the experience of actual and not theoretical struggle, out of surviving the worst of times, out of a history of perseverance. Your ineffectiveness at times might come from a lack of actual struggle, from not living and working in hopeless places or being the subject of and a witness to daily suffering and injustice. Those of us who are Black in this nation cannot help but see the world through a race lens and a critical hope lens. Critical hope promotes the belief in a better outcome. It is the feeling that what is wanted can be, that whatever is desired can be obtained. It removes the blinders of fear and despair and allows us to see the big picture, thus allowing us to become creative and have belief in a better future. Yes, critical hope is audacious. It stands in solidarity with urban communities, the poor, and the marginalized. It sees the space of the possible as larger than the one we are assigned or in. Compassion and solidarity are essential ingredients for radical change, for a cultural shift to be possible. You have a chance to be a people of hope again. Don't waste it. And never rest on your current victories or your laurels. It was written during the civil rights era that the nation's hope must be connected to moral outrage, to action aimed at resolving undeserved suffering. My friends, at the end of the day, there is no known cure for amnesia. Your minds must wake up. Willful amnesia must give way to willful remembering. Remember our history. Remember what it has taught us. You must be a people of hope and promise again. Your strength has always come from real, contracted struggle in the streets and in the courts of law. It has never been easy. So, a few final thoughts. Social justice work is work of the head and the heart. never, never operate out of fear. Operate out of hope. In regards to our criminal justice system, the words of lawyer Brian Stevenson challenges us. He says, we do not need more justice. We need more mercy. What history are you willing to make? Stop talking about how far we have come and start talking about how close we are. Be relentless in your pursuit of justice. It's never been easy. Do not give up. When the road gets tough, do not give up. You must prevail. We must leave this earth better than we found it. Thank you for inviting me, and good luck. Remember, I am watching you. I am Thurgood Marshall.